What if I told you that you could unlock 20 to 40% more retention revenue from email without sending a single additional campaign? That most brands are making the same revenue from 300K emails sent, and they could just be making from just 150. I'm Matt Lady, your host of Cartworthy. I do e-commerce marketing at Client Boost. Today, I'm talking with Eric Rausch, one of the co-founders of New Standard, a retention agency. Eric and his agency have worked with 7, 8, and even 9-figure brands to completely transform their segmentation and retention strategies. He's about to break down exactly how to find those hidden revenue pockets that most operators are leaving on the table. But here's where it gets a little tricky. Eric believes most non-buyers should be killed off after just 15 to 40 days if they haven't converted. No long nurture, no endless drip, just aggressive testing to find out who's actually going to buy. In this episode, you'll learn the exact segmentation framework to implement in just the next 2 weeks, the benchmarks you need to hit for evergreen versus promo sends, and how to run incrementality tests that prove where your revenue actually breaks. Let's get into it. So Eric, tell me, what's the fastest way an early stage brand can unlock up 20 to 40% extra retention revenue without just sending more emails?
Great question. So the first thing that you need to realize as a brand is if you're not segmenting your list and you're ripping to your full newsletter every single time, you basically can't make incremental revenue on your campaigns because there's no new emails to send without sending more. But you can be informed on how to leverage your campaign segmentation for your flow navigation if you are utilizing incremental segmentation to figure out what performs best for non-buyers, buyers, apps, leads, inback. If you're having all of that baseline foundational segmentation within your campaigns, even if you are still sending to your full newsletter list, you can export those data learnings into your flows and find incremental pockets of wins there.
Sweet. No, awesome start. So I'm a 7-figure brand. I'm a low 8-figure brand. We got this so far, but someone raises their hand and says, yo, I've never actually done any audience segmentation. I don't know where to start. What's your first thing? What's your 5 metrics or 5 things you're looking at to gauge and then point them in the right direction for how to start with their segmentation?
So with segmentation, you're really looking for list health first and foremost. There's a ton of dead value in your non-buyer, non-engaged list that hasn't been purged. So you're really not going to make any money from that list, but you can save money if you suppress them and lower your ESP bill. However, if you navigate what percent of your list is former buyers versus non-buyers, you get a little bit of general information there. If you look at who's engaged from your buyers and non-buyer list, you get some information there. But you're looking at, in general, click rate. You're looking at your total non-buyer list size, your total buyer list size, and your total emailable active list size. Those numbers are going to add up to be the same thing. But if you're seeing a large discrepancy in one or the other, it's because you haven't cleaned your list enough to really navigate your segmentation strategy.
Cool. So I'm sure it varies. It depends. I know that's the typical marketing answer. I want to push you a little bit of what are some general, for each of those main metrics that you listed, what are some general thresholds of healthy versus warning versus danger? Just give me some ballparks for each. That'd be super helpful.
So of course it depends, but I'm not going to give you that answer. And you're looking at your segmentation. You're looking at, is this an evergreen send where it's not a promo? Is this a typical promo send where it's maybe, let's say, 20% off site wide? Or is it BFCM, no holds barred, let's rip? If you're looking at a general full send or whatever includes your full send for an evergreen email, you'd like to be over 60% open rate. You'd like to be around 1% click rate. And then the CVR ideally is 0.10 or higher, right? You want that 1% type place order rate. If we're looking at a sale that's not BFCM, anything over 0.5 on your click rate and over 50% on your open rate is generally going to be acceptable. If you're looking at BFCM, really you want to look at over 40. You want to look at over 0.3 click rate, maybe even 0.25. But all of that is also leveraged based on incrementality, which we'll get into. But if you're segmenting properly, you can also see where your click rate is no longer growing after your engage windows break, where your revenue is no longer growing after your engage windows break. So it's actually less of an open and click rate as it is revenue, because the entire purpose of your email send is to generate revenue.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Money in the bank, end of the day. All these side metrics are important, but they're leading indicators. I got you. Okay. So in terms of then getting into what is segmentation, what to start looking at,
Mhm.
what how does segmentation differ or not depending on the brand, the vertical, the industry, the size? I'm sure there's a few different methods or strategies or levers to pull depending on what they are. Or do you guys just use the kind of same base audience segmentation at your agency?
Yeah, great question. The segmentation does vary based on the industry, based on the buying cycle, and based on if you're subscription based or not, right? If we look at subscription in particular, we have prospects, we have a la carte one time purchasers that can be multiple one time purchasers, we have active paid subscribers, and we have the win back churned. There's a whole segmentation strategy that you can navigate with that, but all of it is based on incrementality. If you're also looking at a brand that has a much larger AOV, your segmentation and your buying cycle is typically going to be a little bit longer than if you're just an apparel brand and it's a $45 purchase. So you do need to understand that certain people, especially in the non-buyer group, are going to need to see emails multiple times. They're going to need to engage with emails multiple times before they purchase. So the string of being like a dead email, especially in the non-buyers, has a much longer lifespan. If you're a supplement brand or any sort of brand that needs some data and research, you also need to understand that some people might need more social proof. They might need more data research. They might need more clinical studies. So the question you have to ask yourself is, on a typical non-buyer journey, how many emails does it take for me to complete what is typically like the whole info dump of the buying cycle? And the segmentation within all of these can be incremental. What I mean by incremental, what we keep talking about is, if I send to buyers 60, and that's my only segment I send, and it does 85 grand, they went to 300,000 people or whatever, and it does great. Open rate is strong, click rate is strong, revenue is strong. I'm very happy. The brand's very happy. You have 300,000 people you sent that to, but you could have maybe made the same 85 grand if you would only send it to 150,000 people, because you did buyers engaged 30. So what you also then realized is buyers 31 engaged to 60 produced no incremental revenue. So you basically just sent 150,000 emails to non single dollar in incremental revenue, right? And if you're looking at that, so maybe if you went to non buyers 90 or buyers 90, you could have done 120,000 revenue. So if you're only stacking individual campaign segments in your campaigns, it's impossible to know whether that could have exceeded or over exceeded your expectations of what it did, because you have nothing to foundationally measure it against. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I have a follow up for that because you already stole my next question about incrementality. As a paid media guy, that's like more common language I see on the Twitterverse and the
Mhm.
LinkedIn's and whatnot. But email retention, it's newer to me. So I'd love to learn more. So, how does one actually measure incremental revenue from the email and retention perspective? Like, is it in Klaviyo? Is it another tool? How do you actually go about that?
That is a great question. So incremental revenue can be done in a variety of ways, whether that's in flows, whether that's in campaigns, or just overall. If you're looking at flows, you can measure it one of two ways: an A/B test to the same audience size. Let's say you're just split testing your Welcome Series 1 email. If you have a routine 50-50 split on that, the incrementality is one performing better or worse than the other, click wise, open rate rise, revenue wise. You can also do it based on if you're doing 50% to one send and 50% holdout, right? So that's really true incrementality of this person wouldn't have gotten this and they're tagged in a certain way, or this person did get this and they're tagged a certain way. Of the pooling group that keeps getting larger and larger, what's the LTV? What's the place order rate? Any of those things can be measured. If you're looking at campaigns, one thing that you can do is measure it against what would have been baseline. So let's say I'm an agency and I take over for a brand. I'll look at how they've historically segmented their emails. And if they, then I also talked about the brand, like what are you trying to optimize for, right? Because incrementality is purely dependent upon what the brand is trying to optimize for. But if I look at, okay, you would have sent this email 2 weeks ago, pre new standard, to this audience. Cool. I can put that exact audience in the campaign that I'm sending and add what I would consider the new standard segments to then send the same single email to, let's say, 10 different segments in the same email. From there, I could look at your original segmentations pre new standard would have done this many opens, this many clicks, and this much revenue. Your email did this many opens, this many clicks, and this many revenue. The delta is the incrementality of the segmentation that we did provided 100 more clicks, 5,000 more opens, and 6,000 more revenue, right? Whatever that is. And we can stack that over time. And then eventually you want to get on the same page with the brand and be like, we're no longer doing incrementality. This has proven itself to work.
Super helpful. Yeah, no, thanks for breaking it down that way. So there's no need at this stage to have a third-party tool to kind of do this. There's no extra subscription fees for House, Workmagic, Stella, any of these other incrementality, MMM, or MTA tools as of
We
for what you're
don't
saying so
currently
far?
use them. I'm sure other people do. We measure incrementality differently, and none of our brands that we work with currently use those.
Cool.
However, if you think you can do it better than me and you work with one of those brands, shoot me a DM and let's talk.
Nice. I'll follow up with them maybe afterwards. Sick. So that's incremental revenue. You started to talk about flows and campaigns. How do you then start to implement these new audience segments? You took over New Standards agency that Eric runs, by the way. He took over the brand. How do you start to implement them into all of the flows and all of the campaigns, or how does that actually look like within Klaviyo or your ESP? Like, what's the next
Sure.
step there? Yeah.
So Klaviyo gives you 15 segments per email campaign. That's a crucial thing to note. And it's something that we see many people not really understand. And if you're using those segmentations, and let's say you have only 3 of them being used, if they're not really stackable, you're not learning anything. And if they're not navigable from campaigns to flows, you're also not learning anything. What I mean by that is the following. Let's say we want to increase repurchase rate. So in your general campaign send, if you send to engage buyers 60, which is what many brands do that we see or many agencies do. Awesome, cool. That could provide great KPIs and you can get a lot of learnings from that. But if we were to break it down even further, let's say the next step. Now we're doing engage buyers first time, engage buyers second time, engage buyers third time, all within that same engage 60 window, which is typically open, clicked, or active on website. We can look at a general baseline over an amount of time and say, okay, cool. Just very specific example for you. Our typical engaged buyers 60 does $10,000 in revenue every single send we do. Cool. Then we send let's say a reviews email out, and that reviews email does $1,000 in revenue. Awesome. So that now like 1.7x the typical baseline for that individual segment. So what you could do if you wanted to get granular with it is go to placed order flow, your post-purchase flow, X buyer flow. So this would be a 1x buyer flow or a 2x buyer flow. And you would insert that campaign email into that flow because whatever you're talking about here indexes revenue for this cohort more than any other revenue. You can do that for non-buyers. You can do that for win back. You can do that for lapse leads. You can do that for any segment if you have a baseline for what that typically does in revenue. And you can A/B test that against, let's say it's your win back. Look at your win back flow, look at the lowest performing place order rate, slide that into an A/B test. It's probably going to win. Sweet. Then the next time you have an over index one, slide that into your currently lowest converting win back email and you test in perpetuity. And each time you're testing, you're just increasing your revenue per email for that flow. And over time, you're going to see just a drastic difference in production.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that was super helpful. Cool. No, that's awesome. So you're starting to segment, you're implementing it in the flows, you're implementing the campaigns, you're taking the campaign learnings and putting them into those some of those flows, like you said. In terms of deliverability, this is a more technical and probably more important thing as your
Mhm.
list continues to grow, I imagine. What are some of the rules and guidelines and logic or like criteria that you have around deliverability at a brand at that seven figure, low eight figure
Mhm.
range? What do you want to worry about? What do you not worry about for now?
Yeah, we've audited and worked with plenty of brands in that lower range that have a list where if you do send to the full segment or the full newsletter list, the KPIs are good. And, we look at it and we're like, hey, this isn't bad to just keep sending it to them. Your open rate strong, your click rate strong, your place order rate strong. Great. The ways you can look at that then are what is your bounce rate? What is your bounce suppression segmentation, which for me typically is soft bounce equals 3 over all time or hard bounce equals 1 over all time. So then, second, you get a little bit of a ping, you're out of the system. Of course, you should always go back and just manually suppress that segment in perpetuity. It's always going to grow, it's dynamic. But you're looking at that and you're saying, okay, what is the unsub rate? Cool. What is the bounce rate? Whatever it is, you can't really fix your unsub rate besides sending better emails. Better emails is also arbitrary. Better emails to who? You can fix your bounce rate by doing these suppressions. Your unsub rate will naturally purge your list. Then you go into your active emailable profiles and just manually suppress the ones who have gotten, I would argue it depends on how frequently, but like if you've sent 70 emails to a non-buyer and they've never engaged, what's the point of them, right? You can just suppress them. You can save a little money in your ESP. But the general KPIs you're looking at are your bounce rate being ideally under zero point 0.4, your unsub rate being ideally under zero point 0.3, but all of those are fluctuational based on how you're segmenting. And then again, if you are sending to your full list, do you need to be is the real question. And then what makes an email full list versus not? Because to wrap that up, you can lower your unsub rate if you are sending and reserving the full list emails for full list emailable emails, right? If it's a typical evergreen email that doesn't need to go to the full list, and you can reduce that frequency, you'll probably reduce your unsub rate.
Awesome. Super, super helpful. One follow up on that. What are the typical segments you mentioned earlier on engaged last 60 days?
Mhm.
So, what would be an example of a segment that would receive the evergreen campaign? And then what wouldn't receive that evergreen
Mhm.
campaign? I would love to just a quick breakdown on that, just so
Yeah,
we can,
two
yeah.
schools of thought for people. One is your non-buyer list, right? Do you believe in, blank or get off the pot, or do you believe in nurturing them over a long period of time? I typically like to look at the incremental segmentation of the moment they give you their email, and let's say it's typically like 15 to 40 days. If they haven't purchased or opened or clicked in those, they're dead. You can build up a huge list, but they're generally not going to make you any money. So my opinion typically is to rip those non-buyer engaged for the first 45 days, as many emails as you possibly can. And if they're not going to convert, they're not going to convert long term. So that's the first rule. The second rule is what makes an evergreen email worth it is purely defined by your KPIs. So if you set up, let's just even go super granular, not buyers engaged 15, 30, 45, 60, 90, 180, 365. You have to look and do the equation in your segmentation breakdown of at what point does incremental revenue no longer increase from segment 1 to segment 2. And then that's going to typically break at a certain point, or even if it doesn't. If going from engaged buyers 180 to engaged buyers 365 is 250,000 more emails and it makes you 300 more dollars, what's the point? But if you send that same breakdown to like a sale email, like your Black Friday coming up, it may make $45,000 incrementally. And you're like, that's a huge win. That's awesome. So you do this by just constantly hammering this foundational structure. And over the course of days, weeks, months, organically, this email will do this amount of money, which should go to this amount of segments to create the highest RPE per each campaign. and I know what typically the brand wants to have an evergreen email be at this RPE. And you can just constantly pulse check yourself. Say, I have this email coming up tomorrow. I'm going to send it to this amount of people. It should make this amount of money with this amount of RPE. And if it does better, worse, or the same, you know where you need to adjust.
Really good. Very clear to me. A couple more questions to wind down. Is the last one on the similar to deliverability
Mhm.
and similar to the kind of sunsetting or shit and get off the pot, like buy or die kind of thing you're mentioning? Is there frequency caps, so to speak, of the besides that first one? You have that until the first purchase, like you said, 15 to 40 days. Email them however much you want. For buyers, for subscribers, for multiple purchasers, like how does that fluctuate? Like the quantity of emails that you're sending to those different segments?
We've run this frequency test many times for our brands, especially if you're a brand that's doing daily emails. We've worked with brands that do 2 emails every single day forever. So the frequency test is broken out as follows. You take a typical, let's say 60K of your buyers engaged list, you export the list, you break it up into BAU, business as usual. They get every single email. You break it up into, let's say, 70% of those emails. And then you break it up into, let's say, 50 to 40% of those emails. So in a 1-a-day span, let's say the BAU is going to get 7, the tier 2 group is going to get 5, and the other one's going to get 3. Over the course of 2-3 weeks, whatever you want to run this test, you segment out each of those inclusions and exclusions to see the BAU is going to get every send. You're going to pick 5 emails a week for the 5 email a week group. You're going to pick 3 emails a week for the 3 email a week group. These are going to be lists, not segments. So you can exclude each of the ones that shouldn't be getting it. So the 3x a week is going to be excluded from 4 sends that week. At the end of that period, you basically look at what was the revenue drop off? What was the unsubscription increase? And you weigh those two to figure out, like, okay, we had X many increases in unsubs from the 7 group to the 3 group, but we also made X amount of more dollars. And there is an equation there that you need to look at what the value of a lead is, or the value of your buyer is. And you can do that calculation to figure out what the optimal send count is for each of those segments and each of your brands moving forward. So we've done that many a time. It's very effective, and it works. And the sunset, to answer your second question, the sunset one is a really interesting one because people often do either a large deal to win someone back, or they say, like, please come back. This is the last email we're ever going to send. And you're basically reactivating into your engaged group, right? Because the sunset is for people who haven't engaged in a long time. You're getting like weak fake opens and clicks from these people. The question then, what you can do to see if your sunset flow is even worth it, is to tag them with a profile property that has equals sunset true, or sunset flow equals true. And over time, you can look at everyone who's been tagged in that profile property. How many of them have ever actually repurchased again? Or are you just constantly feeding your engaged list back with just shitty, I don't know if I can say that, with bad profiles that reduce your KPIs and aren't worth it?
Yeah, super helpful. Really, really good. Last question to wrap things up. Someone's just starting their segmentation. They listen to this whole episode. What's like the first 3 things that you would advise them to do in the next week or two to get the ball rolling on this?
Fantastic. Level 1 is buyer, non-buyer. Break out that list of what is a buyer versus what is a non-buyer. Then you can also see what emails convert your buyers and what emails convert your non-buyers. So that's mission critical. Number 2 would be to put your window shoppers and your winbacks in that same thing. So you have buyers, non-buyers, window shoppers, and winbacks. Window shoppers are people who keep going to your website as a non-buyer who haven't purchased. Whenever they do purchase, like, wow, these people have gotten X amount of emails, but this is the one that converted them. Just good information to know. Winback, of course, is they have purchased before. It's been X amount of days since they've purchased past their repeat purchase window. What brought them back? Good information to know. The third step is going to be breaking out those via incrementality. I can't stress this enough. For your non-buyers, it's typically going to be maxed around 90. So you should do 15, 30, 45, 60, 90. If you want 75, cool. You're going to see at what point your non-buyer list no longer produces incremental revenue. Your buyer list will do the same thing, but it's typically from there 30, 60, 90 up to 180, maybe up to 365 if your list is clicking strongly. But again, it's the same logic of looking at it and just seeing where your incrementality breaks. And then you'll know for a non-buyer, if they've haven't engaged in X amount of time, they're typically useless. And for a buyer, if they haven't engaged in X amount of time, they're typically useless. And you can do a last chance to inform your sunset flow or your win back flow, which also that baseline from those segmentations know what window shoppers perform, what win backs perform. So you can put those into those flows too. And that's your rudimentary level 3, 1, 2, 3. See you in a month when those have been running, and we'll talk numbers then.
Perfect. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate all the insight, and hopefully we'll catch you on the next episode.
Thank you.
Big takeaway here, segmentation is not just about organizing your list. It's about finding where your incremental revenue actually stops growing, and where it stops, so you can stop wasting cents, start lowering your ESP bill while making the same money or even more. Huge thanks again to Eric for breaking down the exact 3-step framework to get started, buyers versus non-buyers, window shoppers and winbacks, and testing those engagement windows at different stages like 15, 30, 45, 60, 90-day windows. Please, please, please leave me your feedback, what topics you want to see more of. If you're interested in being a guest on the show or know someone you want to recommend to me so I should talk to, have on, to dive deep and narrow on a subtopic for e-commerce brands 1 to 20-ish million, let me know in the comments, DM on Twitter or LinkedIn. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Cartworthy. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. Catch you on the next one.